Welcome to Tone Talks. Welcome to Tone Talks. Welcome. How's everybody doing today? This is Antonio Moore from Tone Talks. Came across a tweet that I was actually tagged into that literally didn't make no sense. I just wanted to talk about it. You had this woman put up this post about 63% of Black America being middle class, and I just kind of wanted to show how it don't make no sense. That she put this up and 17,000 Black folks and white folks shared this and talked about this with given the reality of wealth in America. Let's talk about it. So under the post, you have conscious Black conservative educator. I love this comment so much. Every single one of my friends are middle class. You are so right. You had people say that it just doesn't fit the narrative. That's why they don't talk about it. It doesn't fit the narrative, and they watch Sanford and Son. We're running into a situation where Black people don't know Black people in America. They don't know the data about Blackness in America. They have basically shunned off everyone other than their small friendship circle, and they don't even know the condition of that circle real well. Like, how many of y'all really, like, with your friend, have seen that friend's bank account, inheritance, will, that the wills that they're going to get inheritance from, laid out the gifts that friend has gotten throughout life, and then really can speak to their state of wealth regarding their home, meaning how much debt they have versus how much equity, and how they're going to use that equity, how much savings they have for their child in terms of college savings, how much of anything, versus just talking about what kind of job they have. When we talk about the middle class, we're not talking about what kind of job they have. We talk about the reality of wealth in America and how that projects itself. What I want to do today is kind of go through the ignorance, not only of that initial tweet, 63% of Black people are middle class and no one talks about us. Why are we invisible in American politics and media? To a larger context of how crazy it is that most of these people in this thread don't even know that Black people aren't middle class. Because I'm going to show you how and what she used for the data point, and it's bordering on insane. It's a data point used by Brookings, which basically says anyone who makes $22,000 to $125,000 is middle class. I mean, basically, they're telling you that working poor people are middle class. In California today, if you make the minimum wage was $13, that equates to $27,000 if you use 40-hour weeks. So they're telling you that middle class people in Brookings Institute's paper that she relied on to tell you this information, that 17,000 of you guys press like on. She's saying that people that make minimum wage in California are middle class. That's not middle class. I need for a lot of people to start understanding like race, economics, and particularly like Black American economics, or just stop talking, because it's really making a lot of problems for having politics move forward, because you are crazy and interjecting that craze into a greater Black narrative. Let's talk about it. So I'm going to talk about this through separate tweets that I said and I replied. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut in the video that I actually used in this actual reply. And I said, this is my first reply to her tweet. Robin A.K. Miki, this post is ignorance, period. Stop just saying anything. And this is a 3-minute cut in that I'm going to use. When we look at white America, they have 83 million homes. Roughly speaking, almost 30 to 35% of them have more than $700,000. Over 23 million, 24 million homes with over $600,000-$700,000. There's 20 million Black homes. Only 5% are worth more than $350,000. That's according to Citibank. 5%. Out of the 20 million Black homes, only 350,000 break $1 million. The reason I know is because I brought the data to you to tell you that. Because nobody else had before. Nobody had told you. How many Black millionaires and how many white millionaires are there? I pulled the micro data with Matt Brunig, formerly of demos.org, and we do an article for you less than 3 years ago. The numbers are higher now. In that article, we showed you basically that almost 1 million white families are above $12 million. Above $12 million. And almost 14 million, 13 million are above $1 million too. You know how many Black families are above $1 million too? A single $1.2 million, counting their home though, not in an account. 350,000 out of the 20 million. And pretty much they're all boomer retirees. The idea of this young Black millionaire has been so projected by sports through the decadent veil that it's confused you about the state of race itself. So white people don't have to pick it, and black people don't know that they're black wealth-wise. And we got a society where everybody's just running around here looking at Cheerios commercials thinking that everything's all right. But I'm going to tell you right now that we don't have to deal with the fact that we don't have the wealth data anymore. See, they gave us the income data until the 90s. So in the 80s, when we're watching the Cosby show, as we start to watch the Fresher Prince, we don't know wealth. Look at it, generally speaking, I think that the overall number, was around $3 trillion in 1980. So by 1990, the whites alone have $21.63 trillion in household wealth. We have one. We move along, and we talked about it just a second ago, right? By 2010, they jumped to $63 trillion. Between 2010 and 2021, those 10 years, they doubled it. They now have almost $115 trillion in household wealth. Now coming back, what essentially you see is that black America has a small slither. So they recently announced that there's $36 trillion in household wealth now. $136 trillion in household wealth. Of that 136, black America has 6.33. White America has a total of 115. So there's a total of $136.9 trillion in household wealth. White America has $115 trillion of it. Now, of our small slither, again, almost 40% is black boomer pensions. The remaining, another 20% of the remaining is still just like real estate and primarily in boomer hands. Working age black people largely have no wealth. So what I told her is black America has a small slither, 6.33 trillion of the $136 trillion in wealth. And using Federal Reserve data, this is how it breaks down by decile, meaning if you were to take black America and break it off by 10%, 20%, 30%, the top 20% of our homes, according to both the 2016 and the 2013 data that came out of the Federal Reserve, and it didn't change that much, and I don't expect it to change much from 2020, the decile breakdown. The top 20% of our home have 90% of our little slither of 6.33 trillion, largely black boomer retirees, and it didn't hinge on them getting educated. Many of them don't even have a high school diploma. It basically was just timing. What you actually find is that college-educated blacks that were born after 82, 83, have an overrepresentation in that bottom 70% of black America, particularly as you start going under the bottom 50, that is negative wealth combined, because they have so much student debt and then the wages never actually added up and they didn't get wealth transfers of any scale. So boomers had just enough to get them through life with a very high, comfortable life, or have just enough to get them through life and have a pension set up that won't pass on. But in actuality, they produce children that far outpaced them educationally and basically did a lot more, but have so much less. But I think this middle class language has created part of that confusion. 90% is in the top 20% of our families, pretty much well-timed black boomer retirees. And this woman told you 63% of our homes are middle class. But they didn't tell you in the initial tweet what their source was. You got to stop sharing stuff when people don't tell you the source. People have to tell you the source, tell you the data points, and then you have to make an assessment. You got to stop trying to feel good and actually be good. Meaning you got to eat good to actually be good. You got to put broccoli in your body. You can't just use candy-colored green stuff that's shaped like broccoli and eat that instead. And that's what this tweet is. So I said they should make every black person, I'm talking about all the ones that tweeted that I mentioned earlier, that said this is a good post or some don't fit the narrative nonsense, go live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where half the black neighborhoods are prisons and the remaining neighborhoods, bar one, are Section 8 homes, or live in Selma. It's just craziness how you're black and lost on black life across America. I look at this and I look at this conversation and I just don't understand how we got here where people don't understand middle class life. They don't understand what that means. They just use the word. They need it so bad that they'll accept anything. We don't want to see no more Sanford and Son. Everybody in their family is Sanford and Son. We want to see the Cosby Show. Don't know nobody with over $2 million saved up and talking about they want to see the Cosby Show. Again, I did Cosby Show Dreams, and I showed you guys that the brownstone that they lived in in '84, when they were supposed to have gotten it, was would have gone for around $700,000. Back then, you had to put 20% down on $700,000, if not 30%. Now, a Brooklyn Heights townhouse of that type would be worth $5 to $7 million. That wasn't a middle class family. Given this context, coming from that same article I did in Huffington Post, in the early 1980s, normal home loans were given at a rate of above 15%. A loan of this type would have been likely considerably higher. In addition, a prospective buyer would have to come with anywhere from 10 to 20% or more of the home value as down payment. On the low end, this family would have to put down $100,000 in cash. Understand, we're not talking about $100,000 even in today's money. We're not talking about even $100,000 in today's money. We're talking about $100,000 in 1980s money. That's like putting down, I think it would be the equivalent of $1 million. Not talking about inflation, talking about how wealth has moved. I think that would be the equivalent of nearly $1 million. A black family that in cash can put down $1 million. I mean, again, there's 20 million black homes. Only 350,000 are worth $1 million hard, $1 million too hard. Most of that 350,000 don't break $2 million or $3 million. They're right there with their home, their pension, and everything else. The reality of a black family that could put down that level of cash, $100,000 in the 80s, and then pay $8,000 a month in the early 80s money. Again, that's like paying a $30,000 mortgage today. And we call that family middle class. And part of the reason that these young people on this Twitter thread are so crazy is that they looked at the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with a mansion and a butler, and they looked at the Cosby Show with a brownstone, a multi-million-dollar brownstone, and 5 kids, and one of them in Princeton, and they called that middle class. That was never middle class. And so now here we are, and we're dealing with this craze and unpacking it and dealing with the whole world where people don't know basics. Comedy relief, let's do it. So there was a guy that comes in, Hurt Your Feelings was his Twitter handle. Antonio, these numbers don't apply. Talking about the Federal Reserve numbers, I've showed those, showing you that Black America has $6.33 trillion. This is according to the Q4 2020 Federal Reserve data. And white America has, I think, a total of $115 trillion, almost 40 to 50 trillion of their 115. 40 to 50 trillion with a T is liquid, meaning stocks, cash, and bank accounts or mutual funds. Of our 6.33 trillion, only 800 billion is liquid. We have literally no liquid wealth. That's why when you look at cities, the color of wealth has shown what we've seen. That's why you've seen $8 liquid for the middle black family in Boston. And that's why you've seen $200 liquid for the middle family in LA. These numbers are starting to add up to say the same thing. So to try to project a world where these cities, Miami, I think it was $11 liquid, now have this blossoming middle class, it borders on craze, period. And I don't know what you're going to do, where you're going to put the craze. But I'm telling you right now, you better confront it, whether it's yourself, your family, your friends, or it will confront you. So this is the kind of craze we're dealing with. His tweet to me was, Antonio, these numbers don't apply to people who deal in cash. You thought you were smart. Said some other nonsense. I guess he thought that was an intelligent post. My reply to him was a pirate from SpongeBob. American middle class families don't deal in cash. That is a trait of poverty. Who says this out loud, talking about his tweet? We got people leading families that don't know basics about stability in first world America. He wants to carry all his money around like a pirate. So he want to carry gold bullion coins in a satchel in a modern first world America today. I mean, to have these young people leading families and they don't know nothing is just insane. See, the reason why you would have cash is you might have child support, you might have debt, you might not pay your taxes. So you keep it all with you because you don't want to put it in an account and it disappear, quote unquote, when actually it's just going to the debt collectors that you owe. So you can show it to us and it looked like cash, but you're negative. In addition, without it being in a bank account, as an example, many home loans, for them to approve you, they need to see a certain amount that was in your account for a certain amount of time. Well, if your money been in a mattress, it don't create that kind of value where you can actually leverage it. I'm sorry to tell you, that you don't understand middle class nor America if you think that people that carry cash count in this analysis. Another guy, Kay Abrams, shout out to him. He said, despite what rap videos and Floyd Mayweather portray, cash is a poor man's currency. Real wealth is the ability to display collateral and obtain loans to grow wealth. I'm dealing with a lot of people who don't understand what middle class is, so I wanted to back out and explain middle class. This is a definition that I found on the internet. The modern usage of the term middle class, however, dates to the 1913 UK Registrar General's report, in which the statistician Stevenson identified the middle class as those falling between upper class and the working class. The middle class includes professionals, managers, and senior civil servants. The chief defining characteristic of membership in the middle class is a control of significant human capital while still being under the dominion of the elite upper class, who control much of the financial and legal capital in the world. So when they're talking about middle class, they're talking about professionals. How many of y'all are professionals or your friends? See, people are calling hairstylists and barbers middle class because they bringing in like $50,000-$60,000 and maybe it's not taxed on a given year using their hands. No, that's not what they're talking about when they talk about middle class. And I think for a lot of us particularly, it's just bordering on craze, bro. And so I unpacked this thing by starting off with what we've talked about before here on Tone Talks, which is using the Ray Diallo chart. One of the richest men in the world did this chart. I add color to it to kind of explain things. When you look at wealth and what it's done over time, what's happened is that the bottom 90 and the top 0.1 had the same amount of wealth back and during the Depression. That's a time of immense inequality. What happened was, over the course of time, as a result of FDR, as a result of civil rights, as a result of labor unions actually getting rights for workers, you saw the bottom 90 start grabbing larger shares of wealth up until Reagan's election. You saw the bottom 90 get to the point, I believe, where they took home 34% of the wealth, and they had pushed the wealthy class down to only taking 7%. As with Reagan's election and everyone after, including President Obama and Clinton and everyone after it, you saw this world where inequality just rose. And that is part of the reason that you see the large jump that I tell you about, where white people went from having around $2 trillion in household wealth to now having 115 over the course of one person's life. One 40-year-old person's life. We've never seen anything like it in the history of man. Now you live here in that world and you don't even understand. You have to have wealth to be middle class. If you don't have like $100,000-$200,000 altogether, I'm talking about you could take, and I'm talking about after debt, meaning you got $70,000 in an account, you got $50,000 saved for your one kid for college, or each kid you have some inheritance coming. You're not truly like middle class stable. In addition, do you have advanced degrees? Without the debt that goes along with advanced degrees. So that means you had parents that actually paid the debt that they were supposed to get you those advanced degrees. These are the measures. So when you see what's happened since then, using the Diallo chart again, since 1980, now, just like the Depression, and actually it's inverted now, the top 0.1 take home more wealth than the bottom 90. That's the moment we live in now. And that's part of the reason that that's the failing of the Brookings paper that this young woman relied on to make this 63% assessment. They're telling you working poor people are middle class because they got to tell you something. And so we come back to it. Within capitalism, middle class initially referred to the bourgeoisie. Later, with the further differentiation of classes as capitalist societies developed, the term came to be synonymous with the term petite bourgeoisie. The boom and bust cycles of capitalist economies result in the periodic proletarianization of much of the petite bourgeoisie world, resulting in their moving back and forth between working class and petite bourgeoisie status. The typical modern definition of middle class tend to ignore the fact that classical petite bourgeoisie is and has always been the owner of a small to medium-sized business whose income is derived almost exclusively from employment of workers, not labor. That brings me to the point where I showed you that Jeff Bezos alone is worth $211 billion. All of Black America, according to the Federal Reserve data, only has $270 billion in private business. we don't really exist in the middle class, bar few. I don't know if everybody understands. And the few people that probably are middle class in Black America, they not working right now. They retired because they got in on that window, and now they don't even know what they're talking about most times when it comes to wealth. But let's use the source from the Brookings that she actually used to make this assessment so we can get a little bit more intelligent and then realize we're not listening to Brookings and what they're talking about because it doesn't make sense. The middle 60% of households on the income distribution, and this is the problem, income does not measure middle class in this kind of world. It's wealth. Income is only a layer of the cake. It might even just be the icing. It's wealth transfers, inheritance and gifts. It's inheritance and gifts. It's the ability, looking at all of your assets, your credit score. A lot of that accumulation comes back through inheritance and gifts. Transfers that happen at key times. Who paid for your your college? Your parents, or did they just leave it with you? Are you going to inherit a home? Are you going to inherit the $100,000 to buy a home? Are you going to get gifted $50,000 or $60,000 of that earlier on in life so you can compete in this market? Or are you just out here freewheeling and just saying you middle class because you got a first class seat? The middle 60% of households on the income distribution, by that measurement, middle class families had incomes between $22,000 and $125,000 in year. Studies, Black people represent 13% of the U.S. population, 61% of which are middle class. Now, it says 61.2 here, and she just said 63. I guess she just made up her own number there. But regardless, what they're telling you, look, in California, the minimum wage is $13 an hour. If you use 40-hour weeks, they make about $520 a week. That is $27,000 a year. They're telling you someone who makes minimum wage in California is middle class. My response is, like I said, ignorance. They told this woman poverty is middle class, and she posted it as proof of success and stability. Again, the traditional measure of middle class is actually to be above people who have to work for a living. That's the traditional. But even if we use a non-traditional sense, it definitely ain't somebody working for minimum wage. But the Brookings Institute told this woman, and this woman told all y'all, and 17,000 of y'all retweeted and pressed like, and told me all your friends is middle class, but don't even know they not. They just working poor. They just working poor. People will tell me, what about my friend who's a lawyer that makes $125? Are they paying $1,000 to $1,500 in student loans? Because they're not making $125 then. See, student loans are a tax. No matter what anybody else tells you, it is a tax by the government. See, they didn't tax your parents. They just made it the cost of tuition lower. What they did now is they just don't want to tell you that you got to make 70% on the dollar. So you already got to pay 40% in federal tax. Well, making you pay student loans is just another tax. You shouldn't. That's school that you went to. So you got to pay another 20%. So take 20 to 30% net off of that 125. Just saying. And even then, you're trying to move into a neighborhood of people who get $500,000 gifts and transfers. It's a lot here. All I know is that a lot of people are talking about the middle class, and they're not talking about the middle class. They're talking about either the working poor or the poor, and then they're framing it as middle class. And they got to understand, if you don't come with the numbers, none of it makes sense. They told this woman poverty is middle class, and she posted it as a proof of success and stability. They are not telling you the inheritance that will be received. They're not telling you the debt level of this individual. They're not telling you the credit score. I'm talking about Brookings. This $22,000 person has many of these things, most likely. They're not telling you the employment status. How consistent is this work? California minimum wage is middle class based on this definition. Part of the reason I wanted to do this video is I wanted to come to you, frame up the reality of how crazy it is to put out a tweet that says 63% of Black folks are middle class if you know Black folks. But I secondly just wanted to frame all the ignorance in the comments below the tweet that show Black people want to party on in an era where they need to politic on. Please support this channel. Visit tonetalks.org to support and share. Patreon is Tone Talks. We out.